So my guest in today's video is a longtime MMO player who's been a serious theory crafter and world first coach in Guild Wars 2, then came back to World of Warcraft, and as the time we tape this interview, casually became the 5th highest ranked Guardian Druid in the world according to Raider.io. He's also among the top 1900 M+ players in the world regardless of spec. No small feat considering the current meta. So I'd like to welcome Twitch streamer BAME to the channel. Thanks so much for coming by today, man. Appreciate your time.
Yep, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, so Bear Tank, it gets a bit of a bad rep within the community. And as we're going to talk about here, and as we've seen in your VODs, you're a smart analytical guy. So why not go for one of the meta tanks? Why a Bear in particular?
So I chose Bear specifically because I have an affinity towards the spec. It is the first tank spec that I've really played when I first started playing around with tanking back in Legion, and I really like the thematic of the spec personally. I am a vegan in my life, and so I have a very strong affinity towards animals, and so being able to actually play as an animal, as a bear myself, that sort of thematic I really enjoy. And so that's sort of why I chose Bear. It's a really comfort pick for me. I feel like I have a grasping on the mechanics of the spec. So I prefer to play something that I'm more comfortable playing over something that is meta.
Sure. No doubt. Was it hard finding willing teammates because you played a non-meta class?
So initially, it actually was difficult to plug into keys.
Sure.
Like, it was very difficult. Like even the Sigma of Bear was present in just even 20s. Like when I started playing, like back in February, 20s were a lot harder than they are right now because the gear that we had back then was obviously like more limited. And so like I pretty much, the only way for me to really, I guess, push keys was to actually just push my own key myself, because getting into groups that I needed for score was obviously very hard because of my of me playing a non-meta class.
Yeah, I hear you. That's more or less where I am too, as a Bear player as well. So I totally get you. So obviously you've been immensely successful here in WoW, and we're going to continue to talk about that and ask some more questions about that. But I understand that in the Guild Wars 2 community, you made some big theory crafting contributions. Tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, so last year, Guild Wars 2 released their new expansion called End of Dragons, and they introduced the new specialization for Ranger called Untamed.
Okay.
And in its initial state, Untamed was probably the worst designed and worst performing elite spec in the entire game. It just had a lot of flaws with the spec. However, it did have a very interesting trait. Every time that you CC'd an enemy, it would reset all your cooldowns by 4 seconds.
Whoa.
And so it turns out that Ranger has a lot of CC skills, and so I did a lot of theory crafting trying to find a very good rotation that allowed you to pretty much chain skills back together by just using your CC skills. Mm-hmm. And I inevitably created a spec that was really, really powerful.
And, it seems like in every MMO, and really even in, single player games, console games, CDR is just super incredibly powerful ability. So I could see how that'd be pretty crazy. And if I understand correctly, you shared that with the community, and that resulted in some world first shenanigans, right?
World first shenanigans. So one of the builds I created out of Untamed pretty much gives you every single boon in the game, whereas other specs you only really maintain like 4 or 5 boons at a time. Mm-hmm. And so the spec was doing pretty much DPS levels of damage while being able to play completely solo, which is completely not normal in Guild Wars 2.
Wow. And so that'd be the equivalent, for example, for us World of Warcraft players, of one player doing the DPS of all the DPS in an M+ key.
Yeah, pretty
much.
More
or less, tripling your damage. Wow. And you were posting these on, the Guild Wars 2 community equivalent of like Wowhead and stuff, right? You were an authority on the topic for the game.
Yeah, my builds are posted to Snowcrows. I believe my solo builds were posted to other websites that provide solo builds to players.
That's awesome. Awesome. Well, how have you used some of those analytical and theory crafting abilities and talents to help you succeed here in WoW?
So I think being very analytically focused means that being analytical focused requires to have like a great attention to detail, and this great attention to detail allows you to see like the little things that you can do for your spec that allows you to improve considerably. And so I would say that those like detail-oriented things have allowed me to figure out how to handle mechanics as Bear, especially on high keys, because a lot of high key routes are designed for prop allies who have a lot better survivability than we do.
Yes, unfortunately. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, I'm with you. Well, let's get back to that in a moment. But first, man, I got to tell you, one of the first things that jumped out at me watching some of the VODs on your Twitch stream there is that a nearly base UI I see there? What's up with that? Or pretty close to base UI?
Yep, pretty much base UI. The only add-ons I use are details, MDT. I have DBM just for the thundering icon because the default thundering visualization is not very good.
It's terrible.
Yeah.
It's terrible. Like it not to cut you off there, some crappy interviewer I am, but it's noticeable with someone who doesn't have a weak aura or something with the little shout over their head or something, because again, the visual is pretty terrible by default.
Yeah, I'm actually a analytics major, so the thundering icon to me is just violates all the rules of visualization that I use.
Nice. No, it makes total sense. So what are some of the ways that you and your teammates play around the Guardian Druid strengths and weaknesses and keys at a high level?
So at a high level, the way to think about Guardian Druid is it's pretty much like Fire Mage. You have Inkarn, which is your incredibly powerful cooldown that allows you to do huge pulls. But outside of Inkarn, you're very, very weak, like even to physical damage. And the one thing you always have to be aware of is magic damage. So casters are a huge threat to me. So like a good example of this is in Ruby Light Pulls. Like the second pack, I think there are around 2 or 3 spellcasters that will just chain cast on me, and those bolts will do around, I think, like a third of my health and damage per cast if they go off. And so we have to make sure that we're constantly locking them down if I don't have any cooldowns. And then when I'm actually out of cooldowns, we have to coordinate stops and kicks on all of those dangerous casters to make sure they don't get through and kill me.
Makes sense. So all right, so you're gonna. I saved this for later in the interview, but now I have to ask, and you're gonna eat my lunch on this question. And you know what? That's fair, right? Because this is someone who plays the same class in spec as you, but not quite at a high level. I am a big proponent of the Nocarn build, and picking up more passive stuff around to kind of always on things like Earth Warden or even Ursoc's Fury, etc., and spreading around Tooth and Claw with Rays.
Yes.
Am I crazy? Am I stupid? Am I missing? I think of Inkarn more as an offensive cooldown that also, oh, by the way, I get some more health. Am I crazy? Am I doing it wrong?
So I think the idea of Nocarn is okay. Like you're obviously trading up that huge burst CD, but a huge tanking cooldown for some passive sustain. But the problem is that in practice, the reality is that on the high keys, there are often very dangerous pulls that you need to do. Like you have to sometimes triple pull, sometimes quadruple pull in order to time certain keys. And the reality is that with Nocarn, you simply just do not have the cooldowns to be able to survive that kind of pull. And so the problem is that our base CDs, like I think it's Berserk's base CDs is very, very weak. And so we cannot do those kind of pulls with just Berserk alone. And so I guess the analogy that I can give here is that, let's just say that you're playing Prop Pally. Would you give it a talent that gives you that 20% crit and damage? Or what was that talent that you can pick over Sentinel?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, you would be the equivalent of going Nocarn on high keys would be going over to that Prop Pally talent over picking Sentinel. So you're giving up an enormous amount of survivability and damage just to go with Nocarn, and you're not really getting much out of it. And so the problem with Raze, I would say, is that Raze is one of the traits that has a trade-off. Like, yes, it does more AoE damage, but you lose a lot of single target damage when you take it, and so it feels very bad to play, especially considering that single target damage is one of the biggest time saves you can get on a high key.
Okay. So moral of the story, kids, is listen to this guy. Not to me, I'm crazy, but that's okay. It's my channel. I'm editing that out. That's not getting in there. No, no, it's all good. It's all good.
I guess I can further elaborate on this.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so nerd alert. Let's nerd out.
Yeah, so there's a lot more to Inkarn. Like, there's actually like when you pick Inkarn, you will always take a talent that makes you reduces cooldown when you spend Rage.
Of course.
And of course, since you're taking a lot of damage as Guardian Druid, you're generating a lot of Rage. And so, while Inkarn has a default cooldown of around like 3 minutes, you can get it down to like 1 or 2 minutes, just from the amount of Rage you spend on a high key. And so that alone makes it a huge like benefit, because you're able to get your 30% health and haste pretty much on every pull or every other pull.
And do you think? How do I say this? So, and that 30% health. I'm trying to figure out. Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. No, I was going to say that in my mind, I feel like the 30% health trade off with the shields and the absorbs you get from, say, like an Ursox Fury and a Tooth and Claw, 15% DR. I do feel like it's worth it for the way I pull, which tends to be a little more dink and dunk than some of the pulls I've seen you do. Yeah. So to be fair, we're talking some different context here. But I'm sorry, I cut you off. What were you about to say?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, like I said, I think Nocarn is totally fine if you're doing like low keys and you're doing like, you're doing like relatively small pulls. You're not really doing huge pulls where you're in very big danger of dying when you don't have CDs. But one of the benefits of Inkarn you forgot about is that it's actually lasts double the duration of Berserk. Mm-hmm. So instead of lasting 15 seconds, it lasts 30 seconds, and that 30 seconds is a big deal. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and with it, so I think that's great coaching is if you're pulling big and situationally that having this moment where you particularly shine, it just, you know what I mean? It's kind of like the difference. I don't know if you're a sports fan, but like it's the difference between regular season play and postseason play, right? You can build the team for the regular season when every game is ho-hum and no big deal, but you have to have that star player, in this case, that star cooldown in order to, be successful in those moments that matter, right?
Yes, yes, of course.
Yeah. So that makes sense. That makes sense. Good, and it's good. It's good dialogue. TLDR boys, I'm wrong, and girls, I'm wrong. No, but go ahead.
I have even more to say.
Sure.
So, I think you mentioned like the Tooth and Claw spread from Raze, but the problem is like I said is that during your big cooldowns, like you have so much Iron Fist attacks that typically melee attacks are not going to be a big deal, but it's really the casters and those magic damage effects that are going to hurt you the most. Mm-hmm. And so the reality is that with Raze, you're giving cooldown reduction to a large portion of mobs that don't really need that cooldown reduction to begin with. But the reality is that you typically only need that CD reduction on like 1 or 2 mobs. And so you see what I'm saying here? Like, let's just say that there's a pack of 10. Okay. 8 of the mobs just melee you, and 2 of the packs are dangerous casters.
Right.
You obviously, during Inkarn, you will not die to those 8 mobs, but it's the 2 mobs that are casting at you, they're going to be a huge threat. And so
right, and doesn't the 15% Tooth and Claw help out with being spread by Raze, or are you just saying you'll just single target maul those to get it out?
I will just single target those mobs.
Gotcha.
Yeah, gotcha. That's what I'm trying to say.
No, that makes great sense. That makes good sense. That's good sense.
And hey, you know what? All this can change next tier because Raze is getting a 20% damage buff with our tier set. And so
that's right. That's right.
That could obviously shift things a lot around. And like I said, I'm always experimenting. But the Inkarn build, the reality is every single bear that has done high keys uses Inkarn, and there's a reason why.
Right.
So, like I said, if you're doing 20s, 21s, Nocarn is totally fine. If you love playing it, that's totally okay. You can totally do that. But for me, when I'm trying to push really high keys, I just cannot do it without Inkarn. It's just pretty much the bread and butter of Guardian Druid on high keys.
Yeah.
And it's really their big niche. It's the thing that makes them shine the most.
Sure.
So.
Sure. Awesome. Good feedback. That's really good feedback. I think one of my challenges is I will zero in when I make what I consider a big pull. I will zero in on like a mob or two that I think is like I need that critical interrupt on or that critical roar, and I want to be able to see their name played over the other ones, kind of thing. And so sometimes I need the Raze because that may not line up with it also being a caster that I need to be targeting to individually maul or something like that. And that is the difference, ladies and gentlemen, between a world-class top 5 in the world at his game and somebody who's pretty darn good but does it certainly at a more casual level. So that's awesome. Great feedback and good coaching.
Yep, thank you.
What were some of the most challenging moments for you here in Season 1 dungeons? Not necessarily just bosses, right? But either bosses or spicy trash packs, in your opinion, that were particularly spicy because you're a bear.
It really depends on the routes that you do. Obviously, I pull really big in Ruby. So
sure.
The first pull in Ruby where you do that triple pull at the beginning is very easy. Like I have Inkarn, I will never die. But it's that second pull with those casters that are immensely threatening to me.
Yep.
Like if like 1 or 2 casts go off, even if I'm in CDs, I'm in very big danger of dying.
Yep.
So that is something I always have to be aware of.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first boss of Ruby Light Pulls is probably the hardest boss to tank as Guardian Druid, just because there is so much magic damage on this fight, and the magic damage is very spicy. Like the bolts, I think on a 25 or 26 time ramp were hitting me for half my health, and that was on top of her melee attacks and the chill storm. And so every single chill storm that occurs, like I'm pretty much fearing for my life. I'm pretty much fighting just to stay alive. But on the flip side, there's also one of the best fights for Guardian Druid because you get so much rage from the ads. You can pretty much just heal your entire party with After the Wildfire. Right. It's actually insane.
Yeah, I agree with you on that first boss there being kind of challenging, even in 22s and 23s where I'm running. Like I feel like I have to start the pull with a CD or that very first bolt. Just suddenly you're at 45% health, right? And it's like, what the hell,
Yeah.
So now you're looking at popping renewal right off the bat before, and it's like, well, now I don't have it as an oh shit button because I oh shitted in the first 3 seconds of the fight. So
yeah, I actually plan around that. Like there's actually a lot of pulls where literally the first like 1 or 2 seconds are the most threatening part, and so I actually have to plan CDs just for the beginning of a fight like that, just to ensure that I survive. And so the first boss obviously is one of those examples. So one thing that I actually have done is I start running away from the boss. The first melee attack doesn't actually hit me, and so that reduces the damage by a lot.
Nice. No, that makes a lot of sense. It gives your healer a chance to react and continue supporting you. One of the places that I find super challenging as a bear is the Courtyard in Temple of Jade Serpent. So exactly. From my perspective, for a long time I feared the boss because the boss puts that enormous healing shield on you, but I feel like bears actually got decent tools to handle that. But the problem is you have to back time and keep a bunch of CDs for it. And the trash in the Courtyard's pretty toxic for bears too. So it's like, I want to use my cooldowns here, but also not on, you know what I mean? But I need to save them for the boss. Did you find that challenging trying to run high keys there?
I 100% agree with you there. That is by far and away the most challenging trash of the season for bear. Just because there's so much magic damage in the Courtyard. Like I think the gazes are hitting me for like 3/4 of my health on like 25-26 fort. And so obviously on a 25-26, the timer is so tight in Jade, you have to double pull everything in the Courtyard if you want to time.
Right.
And so it becomes really dangerous because you have to double pull very dangerous trash that you have to conserve cooldowns for the boss. And it's very challenging to do and pull off. And that's where Inkarn is very useful, because when I have Inkarn, I can probably take 2 tank busters without having to use CDs.
Nice.
And I can pretty much, and that's a huge benefit of Inkarn in that Courtyard. So
cool. Makes sense. Is there some kiting in between cooldowns involved in there, or do you guys find that eats up too much time?
There is a lot of kiting. I will mention one more thing about Jade, and that is the fact that bear brings curse to spell. So if you don't have another curse to spell in the party, you have to deal with that.
Yes.
And so on top of all the dangerous trash, you then have to worry about dispelling your teammates with the curse to spell.
It's a lot of magic damage. It sure is. Yep. Hopefully that health buff that we're getting from our tier set as well, next tier, will help a little bit with the state of magic damage.
It'll help a little bit.
I'd like more DRs or more other tools to but I mean, it's something. So from we talked a little bit about, the class that you and I play here, but from a class and spec perspective, what healers and DPS do you prefer to push keys with, and why?
So for healers, by far my favorite healer right now is Resto Shaman. And this is because they actually bring a 10% health increase for bear, which is pretty huge because it can stack on top of with fort. And then they also bring Earth Shield, which is a passive 6% damage reduction. And that really helps smooth out bear's damage outside of Inkarn, which is obviously their biggest weakness, but like I mentioned earlier.
Makes sense.
And Resto Shaman also has, they've got very high damage for a healer, and their overall healing output is very high, especially on single target, and so they're very good at healing bear, from my experience. And they bring a lot of utility to the party. They bring Earth Ellie, so that can take a lot of pressure off you in dangerous situations. They bring a 12-second kick, which is huge because that really helps reduce a lot of the dangerous casts that go on us. And they bring Ankh. Yeah, Ankh is huge because you can save a B-res if they die.
Right.
Yeah, there's just a lot of things going for Resto Shaman. It's by far my favorite hero to play with right now.
What about any DPS in particular that you prefer? Or is it just, hey, whatever's meta?
It's not... So, I don't really have a preference towards any specific DPS. I would say Shadow Priest, because Shadow Priest is just broken right now with the current dungeon design. In every single major dungeon, they have something that's pretty much useful. Master Spell is broken in many dungeons. It's broken for this week because they can just get rid of bursting. Yeah. Fort is very good. Fort is just 10% more health, which, like I said, is huge for us.
Always helpful. Yeah, makes sense. So, and then one more thing about teammates here, and then we'll move on a little bit. So we talked about this a little bit earlier. We hinted at it a little bit earlier. How'd you get to where you are now? Do you pug? Do you have a static you run with it? Is it a combination of both? Have you just built up a network or kind of organically? How did it happen?
So I will say, when I came back at the beginning of the season, I pretty much started from the ground up. I really had no friends coming into the season, and so I really had no like networking or any friends to really play with at the beginning of the season. So I pretty much plugged my way up from the ground up. So I would say I pretty much plugged the majority of my way up here, around 3,200. That's when obviously the keys became really hard to the point where I started to build up my network and build like a lot of people who really like playing with me. And now I pretty much just run exclusively with people I know, while plugging maybe like 1 or 2 DPS just to fill keys.
Yeah. Well,
but
I mean,
I still
that's
plug.
awesome.
I still plug regularly, so.
Well, that's still awesome. That's awesome, though. That I agree. In general, keys are just more fun with folks once you've collected a group of folks that you like to do it with. So I play in a guild of older professionals with careers and families. So we're always constantly evaluating like how do I balance my nerdy gaming habit with my real life commitments and whatnot. So I mean, I love to ask folks this question all the time, but especially for you, someone who plays at a world-class level. How do you balance gaming and real life? I think I heard you said you're in school right now. How do you find ways to manage all that and still be a world-class player at this?
So for me personally, I've always been very efficient at getting work done for school and stuff. Generally speaking, like it doesn't really take me a lot of time to get things done as long as I'm very focused. And so I feel like being very efficient with the work that I do has really helped me have more time to be able to actually game and stuff. I've always had like an ability to just perform well in school, even when I don't spend like a crazy amount of time studying, just because I'm very focused. I feel like whenever I put time into something, I put a lot of effort into it, and so I get the best result out of it. And
it also helps that you're in school. I'll tell you that right now. Although I will say, I got to tell you, I'm glad World of Warcraft was not out when I was in college, because I would have no-lifed it and I would have not finished school. Now, speaking of that, talking about the focus and the commitment right there, I think that segues really well into the next question. So obviously, M+ is an infinitely scaling system, right? So it is designed around repetition and failure and learning and repeating and failure over and over again. So, I mean, I know personally when I scuff a key and I know part of it was my fault, I feel like I alternate between getting angry or frustrated and then like super, oh my gosh, I let my teammates down, or at least, but that's just me. So I love to ask really talented players, how do you deal with that, right? That constant system, the constant feeling from the system that's designed to make you fail.
Yes, I will say, like, do not get let down by depletes. That is the biggest mistake I made when I first started playing. And the problem with getting let down by depletes is that it's very easy to get discouraged. Like, you make a mistake. It's very easy to make a mistake as a bear, and when you make a mistake as a bear, you probably die. And when you probably die because you're the tank, you probably just break the key right there. Right. And so mistakes are very, very punishing. And the reality is that everyone who does high keys knows this. And so when you make a mistake, just realize that people are probably not going to blame you for your mistake, because they probably have made the same mistake countless times themselves. And so just knowing that can make it very comforting. Just know that you're not alone in the situation that you're in. Like, I would just go, like, if you just watch like the top players in the world, like Andy, like now, if you watch their streams, they're failing keys pretty much constantly. And they're failing keys to really dumb stuff. I hate to say, yeah. No,
and I got you. And one other thing in both in those streams and something I noticed in the VODs of yours that I was watching is, having, like you said, supportive teammates that understand that, hey, like, we're all human and it's a mistake. But we're all going to make them, and let's learn from it and move on, as opposed to being like, hey man, what the fuck? Why'd you do? You know what I mean? And like, that's not, what are you, a child kind of thing. So I noticed having supportive teammates, seems to help a lot.
That is 100% true as well, because the reality is when in pugs, like, people typically just leave when a key is bricked and they don't say anything. And so it can feel very daunting just to make a mistake and have the key just end like that, because it's like, oh, what do these people think about me? Do they hate me now? Do they feel negatively about me?
Sure.
Those sort of feelings at Dow happen to me all the time. But the reality is that people probably just don't care most of the time. They probably are just like, oh, it's just a mistake. It's fine. It happens. Let's move on to the next key.
Yeah. I will say that, though, I do prefer somebody just leaving over someone that has something nasty to say. I'm the kind of player that, like, if somebody says something truly nasty, like, it takes me a minute to recover from it and refocus. So I would much rather they just leave.
Yes. So a lot of people have actually asked me about toxicity. And I've only had about, I would say, in my entire experience, like, plugging this season, probably 2 instances of toxicity on And those were, I believe, in like a 23 Shadow Moon.
Just the fact alone that you would say you've only had blatantly toxic experiences twice in M+ means you need to go out and buy a lottery ticket, man, because I imagine that is not the typical World of Warcraft player's experience there. I think a lot of us get it a whole lot more than that. But no, all joking aside, man, I'm glad to hear you're having a great experience there, and that the community really puts its best foot forward up there. So
yeah, sure.
What's next then? You sticking around for season 2?
I absolutely will be sticking for season 2. Yep.
All right, and
I may
still
not...
playing the bear, or looking at maybe trying something else out?
Definitely playing bear. Like I said, I love playing bear. I love playing it. Like, I feel like I'm very skilled at it, so obviously I should keep it up.
Yeah. What's your take on the dungeon rotation and the affixes for next season? Anything really stick out to you?
So, at first glance, I actually thought it was going to be a very bad season for bear because a lot of the new affixes are heavily centered around CC and dispels. Like, I guess to give you an example, like Afflicted is the new affix. Like, you need a dispel to get rid of it, and Prop Pally only needs 1 talent to take a dispel, while bear needs 3.
Right.
And bear gives up a lot to get that dispel.
Yeah.
But from what I've not tested this yet, but I believe the Afflicted Souls can be healed by After the Wildfire. If that is the case, that'll actually be pretty huge, because you don't actually have to waste GCD like healing them. You can just do your rotation and then just heal them passively. I'm not sure yet. Like I said, I need to test that and see if it's actually enough healing to get rid of them.
It would be amazing, because like you said, like my typical build, if I have to pick up Remove Corruption, I'm usually giving up Nature's Vigil, probably Innervate, and possibly Heart of the Wild, or I can't remember the name of the talent, the one that makes my bark skin last longer and let me receive more heals, all of which are just like, I don't want to give any of that up. You know what I mean? So
yeah, they're very bad talents to give up. I just realized this myself, but I think raging is actually going to be very problematic, because raging makes it so you cannot like stop mobs once they get with the low health, and obviously, like I mentioned earlier, like you need Stop Despair to survive a lot of pulls, and so that could potentially create situations where you're just hard stuck as a bear. Like you get into a situation where you're relying on stops, but then the mobs get low, they trigger raging, and then you can't stop them anymore, and then you just get tapped by a magic tank buster. Now, obviously, you can play around that. You can soothe the mob, but if it's like an AOE pack and you need to soothe like a high priority mob that is not threatening to you, that could potentially be an issue.
Right.
I think Incorporeal is another affix that's problematic for bear, because you have to take Hibernate, and that's yet another thing that you have to swap talents for. Like you'd be giving up you'd be giving up stuff like Nature's Vigil, Innervate, Heart of the Wild, and potentially like something that's very important just to take that 1 talent on top of your Curse Dispel, which you're probably going to need in some dungeons anyway.
Yeah, I feel like, and again, I'm only familiar with about 3 of the tanks, but I feel like we have to give up, we have to make a lot more hard choices if we have to be able to get at things like Hibernate and our version of the Cleanse as well, compared to some other tanks that maybe don't have to. So any worries there with the next season about the how prevalent it looks like the disease cleanse profile is going to be, as opposed to right now where it feels like there's a lot of dungeons where we've got curses and poisons and we can help, but less so with the diseases from a couple of the dungeons?
Unfortunately, that's just another tick for Prop Pally, because Prop Pally can dispel diseases.
Right.
I know for sure Brackenhide is a mandatory disease dispel. Like if you don't bring disease dispel to that dungeon, you're pretty much you're not going to do very well. I believe, I don't know the exact like profile of the disease, but I believe it reduces your max health, right? Or max health and haste.
Yeah,
I can't remember correctly.
It's definitely haste. I think in M0's, man, it's been a while since I've run an M0. I thought it was even like a snare in haste or something like that. Beats me. It's bad. Whatever it is, it's bad.
It's very bad, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. We'll have to see how it plays out. His Twitch channel is BAYM Gaming. That's BAYM_gaming. We've got a link in the description of this video to his channel. Check it out. He's got some good content on there. BAYM, thanks so much for joining me today, and best of luck in season 2.
All right, thank you very much.